Good afternoon, and welcome to the Dynasty Dugout Show. It is Wednesday, February 14th. It is Valentine's Day. We're live talking Marlins prospects. We're talking a potential Edward Cabrera trade, which is quite interesting. What are the Marlins doing? Where are they going with their organization and team? And all the good things we're going to talk about. So thank you for being here. If you're visiting with us, several visitors in the room, if you would consider creating an account here on Playback completely free, and you can chat in the chat room. It benefits me in a great way as the room grows. So we're going to talk all things Marlins. I know our guy Upper Beck is very excited to talk Jacob Berry, his favorite prospect that he saw in the Arizona Fall League. I know Beck's very excited for the Berry talk. We'll get to Noble Meyer here in a second. He is one of their top guys. Let's talk about this potential trade to get started. Last night or late last night, it kind of surfaced that the Marlins were shopping Edward Cabrera to the Pirates. It's an interesting deal. The Pirates organization has some talent, but none of that big talent is going to be going to Miami in this potential deal. So it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out. There have been a lot of rumored players. The original proposal or rumor per se was Braxton Ashcraft, Jiwan Bay, and then one of Mitch Jebb or Jun Seok Shim. And that would be with Edward Cabrera and another player going back to Pittsburgh. I've talked a lot about Cabrera. I am personally not that big of a fan of Edward Cabrera because he can't throw strikes and he can't keep guys off base via walk. The stuff is pretty interesting with Cabrera. I think that there is potential here. The Marlins have a really good MLB pitching development org, but yet we haven't seen Cabrera take that step that he needs to, especially with strike throwing. So I'm wondering, what can Pittsburgh unlock? What does Pittsburgh see? Yes, he has the arsenal. He's got the stuff. But what does Pittsburgh think they can unlock in Edward Cabrera as a starting pitcher? Because my sense has always kind of been that Cabrera would be moving to the bullpen in Miami sooner than later due to the arms that are coming through Miami's system. And we'll talk obviously about those arms. They've got Max Meyer coming back from Tommy John. They drafted two high-end arms in this summer's draft. So all those things are kind of interesting. It all leads me to believe that Cabrera may have been on like his final leg as a starter in Miami. And that's kind of the sense I get here, that they want to trade him, especially considering Meyer. We don't know exactly when he'll be ready to be back in that rotation. Trevor Rogers has been pretty up and down. The Marlins farm system does need some work. And obviously we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but we'll see what the final return is in this deal. I do like Jun Seok Shim. Penny, he does come over. He's got some really good traits in his arsenal, especially with that fastball. So it kind of leads me to believe that Shim could be one of the major players in this trade, even though he's not highly ranked. Mitch Jebb was a draftee this year by the Pirates. High field to hit. Not a lot of tools across the board, but he does have a really strong hit tool. Nick Gonzalez could be a possibility. We know that the Marlins love their second baseman, and Nick Gonzalez fits that bill perfectly. Kind of a post-type guy at this point. And Nick Gonzalez is fine. He's not the top draftee that he once was, and that hype that he got when he was drafted. So that'll be interesting to see how things shake out in this deal. It seems like everything's kind of there at this point. It's in place. We're just trying to nail down the final names. And there's so much smoke, it seems like, that this trade does end up happening. So Let's talk the Miami Marlins farm system. I will link the write-up from the site in the chat down here. You can follow along as we talk through the system. I dropped it in the chat here. I'll share this screen as well. We'll get some video when we come across some prospects. There's some good video on as well. But starting at the top, we have Noble Meyer. That was a question, the first question in the chat. Any thoughts on Noble Meyer from Baseball 27? Yes, I have lots of thoughts. Yeah, if you want to drop any question in the chat, you feel free to do so. I think you do need to be logged in or be a member to chat. So if you're a visitor in the room, feel free to make an account and you can chat along with us, ask any questions. I'll be happy to answer those. Noble Meyer, he established himself as one of the best prep pitching prospects in the 2023 MLB draft. He was drafted as such. The Marlins, I believe, played completely into their strength of pitching development and took Meyer in the first round. When we look at the arsenal, honestly, I get a lot of like early Mick Abel vibes. Like this is what I kind of see in this arsenal. And this not a bad thing. Like Mick Abel, when he was drafted, had all the talent in the world. He just hasn't been able to really put the command together. But Meyer, 18 years old, in his pro debut, sinker set around 95, averaged 17 inches of horizontal run. This is right in line with all the prep data that I had on him from combines and from showcases and that sort of thing. He's set in the mid 90s. The sinker has really good movement to it. It has good depth. The velo comes really easy. And honestly, like I think that this frame could add even more. You look at a 6'5", 185 frame, and there is a lot to like in the potential to add velocity here. His slider, mid 80s, has a lot of sweeping action, shows some nice vertical drop as well. High spinning pitch, like looking at this pitch, the spin rates, kind of the makeup of the pitch, it reminds me a lot of a Jackson Jobe slider as a prep with what we saw, Jobe having those kind of raw high spin rates, get a lot of movement, the profile. And we've seen how that's worked out for Jobe to this point. He is my top ranked pitching prospect in baseball. I believe Noble Meyer has that kind of upside. The changeup will be the kind of sticking point for Noble Meyer. The big thing with Meyer is that he didn't need a changeup in high school. You can dominate hitters when you throw mid-90s and you have that kind of slider. You don't need to throw a changeup. So he didn't do that often. And this will be a pitch that he'll need to further develop so that I believe he can take that step to be that kind of arm that we believe that he could be. When he does throw it, the arm speed does sell the pitch pretty well, which is encouraging. You have to sell the changeup well, and you need it to have the similar arm speed to the fastball in order to really play up. So Meyer, all in all, he could hit ace upside. Baseball 27 asks. I do believe that there's that possibility that he could become an ace. That is a really high label to throw. I don't throw that around often with guys, but I will say that arsenal was extremely impressive when we saw it in the pro debut. The data looked really, really good. And so I am a believer in Noble Meyer to get drafted and immediately rank in the top prospect in the system is pretty good. The next guy is another draftee, and that's Thomas White, a lefty that they drafted this summer. He was the consensus top lefty in the draft. They take him 35 overall with their second pick. White already has a big fastball. It's a very simple, low effort operation. He sits mid 90s. He's got up to 97 as a prep. It again shows a really good arm side run. Both Meyer and White have shown the ability to be able to move that fastball. White's plays better at the top of the zone, being a higher IVB pitch. Meyer's being more of a sinker, will play better down, but White's is showing good ride, good run up. Kind of the difference in White and Meyer is when we look at Thomas White, he's already got a really developed changeup. It's very advanced for his age. For being a lefty, that's huge. Like when you can run the changeup away from righties, that is a very viable offering. And we think normally about a righty with a changeup. Like a changeup plays good away from the batters. And so a righty doesn't have as many times to be able to throw that changeup. But White being a lefty, having a developed changeup already, it's huge that he will be able to use that quite often to run it away from right-handed batters. The pitch recorded some really, really good metrics. You look, it had 14 inches of fade on average. It showed 30 inches of vertical drop. Like, those are pretty nasty metrics for a changeup. So that already plays really well. Curveball drops it down into the upper 70s. He gets whiffs. He can throw it in or out of the zone. It does get some sweeping action with the vertical movement, which is pretty interesting because the depth is really good on that pitch. And sometimes when it gets that sweepier action, it looks more like a slider. But the depth of the pitch, like sometimes they're split. I'm curious what this development looked like this offseason as far as like, do they split those two pitches? Is he able to differentiate the slider and the curve? I think right now you can argue if he has a singular breaking ball that you're looking at least a potential plus fastball, plus change, and plus breaker. If he differentiates the breaking balls, what can he become? I think that's a really good question. And I'm really excited to see what the finished product looks like for both Meyer and for Thomas White, because I think the potential here is really, really good for both guys. And I firmly believe in the Marlins pitching development. They've done wonders with arms. They've developed changeups in a lot of these arms. And so while White's is already advanced, I mean, Meyer with a developed changeup could be really nasty. Down the farm, Vinny's here. He asked, am I crazy to like Thomas White more than Meyer? I mean, I'm certainly in the team Meyer camp, but I wouldn't be shocked if Thomas White does push up to that kind of status. I mean, you look and EVB even asked, is Thomas White projectable? He's 6'5", 210 is the list. Let's see if I can find like a kind of updated footage of him. I still think there's projection in both. I mean, Meyer is super projectable. He's much more lanky, but White, I still think has room. I mean, you think 6'5", 210, like you could certainly put on some good muscle on that kind of frame and could see velo added. I think normally when we think about an 18-year-old arm, we usually see them add a tick or two. Now, when they're already sitting like in these mid 90 range, like how much room is there to actually add? And it's not a ton. We don't often see guys that are, 18, 19 sitting mid 90s just magically jump and they're now sitting 98, 99. But it's not out of the realm of possibility to see them add a tick or two, which does wonders. I mean, just look at the results on fastballs by velocity. Every tick up, the results get better. And I know people say velocity, some people argue velocity doesn't matter. Well, it absolutely does, in my opinion. Like velocity matters a ton. And when that velo increases, which is highly possible with a 19-year-old kid, then the results get better, especially when they have good traits like we've seen with Thomas White, like we've seen with Noble Meyer. And I'm really interested to see what Max Meyer looks like coming back from TJ. You might could argue that he's the best prospect in the system. I'm kind of mixed bag on him. I actually like buying him right now in a dynasty league because the value has dipped so much. Meyer, he was drafted 3rd overall in the shortened 2020 draft. He flashed some really good things. He is kind of a bit smaller, which has always kind of been my concern. Like, is he a bullpen arm? Is he a starter? Can he handle a regular season starter workload? And all those things were still kind of to be determined, I think, with Meyer. We haven't fully seen that yet play out. So we know he's coming back from TJ. We know he's going to be on the mound this year. In what capacity? I think that's a good question. And I think they're going to give him every chance to be a starter possible. You don't draft a guy third overall and just throw him immediately into the pen. Now, I mean, crazier things have happened, and we've seen like Garrett Crochet just go straight to the pen. But I don't believe this is the Marlins' intention here with Max Meyer. And obviously, we'll see how this shakes out. I am really curious to see what he looks like coming back from Tommy John surgery, because in the past, he had been, mid 90s with the fastball, can kind of get flat at times where it's not running much, not a lot of horizontal movement, but it plays up enough at the top of the zone, especially from a lower release height and having a good vertical approach angle, that it sets up the slider really well, which was his swing, always been his swing and miss pitch. Like when we look at Max Meyer, like the slider has been the bread and butter. And I think the interesting thing is, like, does he fully develop a changeup? I still think that question is to be determined. Here's a little bit of his pro debut I'll share on the screen, and we will kind of talk a little bit more about his arsenal. This is from MLB Film Room, looking at his pro debut, there's the slider. I mean, the slider looks good, 90 miles an hour. It kind of fluctuates velocity a little bit. Fastball located up at 95. There are good things to like here. I think that the changeup will be the big sticking point of development for Max Meyer. When all is said and done, can he throw the changeup enough and at a high enough level to be a high-end starting pitcher? And I think that question still needs to be answered, especially this year. We'll kind of see, what does the arsenal look like from Max Meyer? Because when he's healthy, when he's throwing it, it's flashed some interesting traits. I mean, 15 inches of fade is really solid from a changeup. And that's what we've seen from Meyer in the past. And then that slider, when it's on, when he's really snapping it off, is a really, really good pitch. Like I said, that's the whiff pitch. The fastball sets it up well. Meyer's got the potential. I really believe that Meyer has the potential to be a starter, but I also think there is some bullpen risk. But I will tell you that I've invested a lot in Max Meyer this offseason in Dynasty because the cost has been so low. And I'll take that chance that we see a healthy Max Meyer this year, continue to build back up innings, continue to show the repertoire that we've seen in the past. And I really believe that there is all the potential in the world here. So Max Meyer, he's an easy buy for me this offseason. The next guy on my list, he's considered a prospect some places, other places not. Xavier Edwards, he graduated on service time, but he only has 78 MLB at-bats. So he's well under the threshold to technically graduate, but he's kind of set on the bench some. He's bounced all over. He was 38th overall pick by the Padres way back in 2018. He was then traded to Tampa Bay in the infamous Blake Snell deal. And now he is with Miami, where I think the playing time opportunities should be there. Like, I think he should get regular run in Miami. Their depth chart is set up so weird. I mean, we joke, but they have a bunch of guys that feel very similar in the way of like, okay, like there's a lot of versatility, a lot of second basemen. They've moved guys all over. You have some power guys that have questionable contact, and you have this similar type of like Luis Ariz type. And honestly, like Xavier Edwards kind of feels like he profiles not that kind of level of contact with Luis Ariz, but he does make a ton of contact. You see the contact numbers there in the article, and he had a 90% overall contact rate, which is elite. I mean, that is Luis Ariz numbers, and then a 93.2% zone contact. Pair that with a 26% chase rate, which is much better than average. Those are really good traits. I think the question mark with Xavier Edwards is kind of power does he get to? You see the exit velocities, 85.7 average exit velocity, 98.1 ninth percentile. The ninth percentile is like very bottom of the bucket number. And then when we think about like the average exit velocity, it's pretty low as well from an average standpoint. So that would be something to look at too. I'm looking at the lowest qualified from last year, and 85.7 would put him eighth worst in all of baseball, right around like Geraldo Perdomo, Bryce Terang, those type of bats. So you kind of know what you're getting here with Edwards. He's got speed, which is he hasn't really stolen like at the elite rates that you kind of think that he would have, but he is a safe contact hitter. I think he steals bases. How many home runs does he get into? I don't know. I think that's a major question mark, but kind of know what you're going to get with Xavier Edwards. And if all said and done, like I said, a peak outcome could be like 310, 40, and 10 might be a stretch, but he's not a finished product. So that's still something to keep an eye on with Xavier Edwards. Here's Beck's boy, Jacob Berry. Berry, he was quite hyped coming out of LSU, and for good reasons. I mean, Berry did some really good things in his collegiate career, but drafted sixth overall, he certainly has not really lived up to that hype. There's some reasons behind that, and it starts with power, which he severely lacked at LSU. The power numbers look decent with a metal bat, but the exit velocities were really poor. And the translation from metal to wood, typically we see a drop of like 4 to 5 miles an hour in exit velocities, which is pretty significant when you think about it. And Berry has not showcased much power at all. So that's the question mark. Like with Berry as a corner infielder, like you need him to kind of get into some power. And yet we haven't seen that materialized yet. You look at the frame and he looks like somebody that should get more power than he has. So the question is like, who is Jacob Berry? The contact rates have been better than average. Like for minor league standard, he had a 77% contact rate last year, which is good. But in the process, for his pro career, he slashed just 233, 284, 388, which far from ideal. Beck got this title. If you're looking in the chat, Beck got the title of being Berry's boy in the AFL because Beck was down there for a little while before I got down there, and then the first pitch crew got down there. And Beck had just mentioned that he thought his glove looked a little better than most people said at third base, which was true. Like Berry was serviceable at third base. Beck was not over there playing third base, but Berry was, and he was good enough. Like he was passable at third base. Whether he sticks there or not, I think that's still a question mark. Probably still a below average defender at third base. May have to shift to first, but I'm just concerned because this profile, if you're looking from a dynasty standpoint, like, what does that look like? How does this profile produce? Like, the power's minimal. At least you want really solid OBP numbers, contact numbers, like a Nolan Chanuel if you're not going to hit for power at the corner. But Berry doesn't even do that. Like while the contact rates have been good, I don't think he's done enough to say like, okay, like this is a profile that can excel without the power. I mean, 9 home runs between 2 stops last year. And yes, I will acknowledge that playing in Miami's high A in the, I don't remember exactly what league that is, but Beloit is early in the season. That's specifically a really pitcher friendly environment, but still Berry didn't even show good plate discipline there. 287 OBP, 4.6% walk rate, not ideal. And even in double A, just a 301 OBP. And this was post the tacky ball being gone from the Southern League. So that obviously is not great. EVB says, does he make the majors? I feel like that the Marlins almost like have to push him to the majors because like you draft him so high and you want to at least say like, oh, he made the majors kind of thing. And yeah, no, that sounds really stupid, like to even say, but it's kind of a real thing. Like you spend a 6th overall pick on a guy and you at least want to check the box that he made the majors. So, I don't think it's crazy to say that he makes the majors. What kind of role it's in, I still say that's probably to be determined, but Barry does not excite me a whole lot for fantasy purposes. And then when you think about him being the 5th overall prospect in the system, okay, like we see we're getting pretty thin pretty quick, which is why I think a trade with Pittsburgh would be really good because I think there's some guys that they mentioned that could immediately vault in this top 5 because I have Troy Johnston as the 6th guy. He's an old prospect. He's 26 years old, but he did hit 26 home runs last year. He had 36 doubles, 5 triples, stole 24 bases. Johnston's pretty interesting. While the slash line looks good, I would say not so fast, like not going to be a 300 hitter, not going to be a 400 OBP guy. I just don't see that kind of profile for Johnston. The contact rates are fine, but he's so hyper aggressive. I do fear that he does get eaten up a bit as he moves up. So Johnston is one that will be an interesting one to follow, in my opinion, where like you think, man, like this guy's in the top 10 in this system, but like who else are you going to go with? I think those are the interesting things. And there are some guys that you could pick here. I'd be fine with. A lot of these guys have faded in my books. And there's some breakout potential among young guys. But for now, I mean, like Johnston, like not even in my top 500. And then it's kind of a glob of Marlins guys here. So this could go a lot of different directions. I would dare say this looks a lot different. Like you look at the top 5, I'd say the top 3 arms kind of stay the same. No, or Max Meyer will graduate. Xavier Edwards will graduate. Does Barry bump up to 3? Maybe somebody else can take that spot. We'll see. I do like Brock Vradenberg a decent bit. And he's one I'm a little bit more hesitant on, just being a first base only type out of Michigan State. But we'll see what he's capable of as a pro because you can look at this college data in the article that I have, and it's like, okay, this dude could be something. 2023, 400, 492, 721 slash. That's pretty impressive. Again, with a metal bat, he hit 13 home runs, but the contact rate's really strong. Chased at a 17% clip, one of the lowest among all draftees. 79% contact rate, 86% end zone contact rate. You like to see all of those things. And then the power came really easy with a 91 mile an hour average EV, a 106 90th. Those were strong. We see him tick down. I think there's probably like average to above average game power here with wood bat. There will be pressure on the bat because Vradenberg is completely limited to first base only. He's 6'7", massive guy. So the contact skills really good. I think that the OBP league, like he plays up. If you're an OBP league, push him up a little bit because there is potential here because the low chase rate, the good contact rate. I think Vradenberg's a sneaky one to make moves this year, and we'll see kind of how this plays out. And I actually want to skip down a couple who a guy I do think has potential, and some have ranked pretty high, and for decent reason, and that's Kemp Alderman, another fellow draftee out of Ole Miss. Read that first sentence of the article, and you can kind of see why. Kemp Alderman had the highest 9th percentile exit velocity in college baseball last year, 114.6 miles an hour. That's a number that no one in pro ball touched. And I understand that's metal bat, ticks down a little bit. That's still really, really good power from Alderman. So I understand why people are pushing him high because the power is legit. And you even see in the pro debut, like with a wood bat, he had a 110.2 9th percentile. So still really elite power there. The average in college was 94.7. Might be 80 grade power with Kemp Alderman. But my concern is the contact rates. You look in college, 80% zone, 70% overall. In the pro debut, that was 71% in zone and 57% overall. Small sample. So I'm not putting a lot of stock into the pro contact rates, but I still think that is worth noting because those aren't great. The college numbers themselves were kind of concerning. Big time power over hit type profile, maybe a first base only. He's going to need to hit for power, which he can, and we've seen. But the contact concerns are the reason that he does sit a little further back for me. And I'm not nearly as high on him as most have been in FYPD rankings and even prospect rankings. I've seen him pretty high. And if the contact rates develop, then this is a really fun profile that we are looking at. But ultimately, when we look at the contact skills, and I'm like, okay, those are not there. Dax Fulton. Let's go back to Dax Fulton because I do think that Fulton could really vault up these rankings. And he was one that was kind of a pick for me to break out prior to 2023. I really like the potential with Dax Fulton. I mean, there was a lot of things in the arsenal to like. He's a big 6'7" lefty. He creates funky angles for batters. And while he's been banged up quite a bit in his career, like he had Tommy John, his senior year of high school, completely, obviously 2020 missed year anyway, but he had TJ. And it looked like that he was finally rounding the corner in 2022. And then elbow injury again ended his AA season last year after just 33 innings. I wonder if the elbow was flaring up all year. And that was the reason that he walked so many. He pitched to a high ERA. And that'll be something to watch this year. Fulton, when healthy, throws a lot of strikes. He has taller frame, gets a lot of extension. The downhill plane, like it's a two-seam fastball, which I love out of a bigger guy. I hate when organizations try to make pitchers throw four-seam when they can't. When you're throwing from a higher release point, it's just so hard to make a four-seam work up. Let these guys, these big guys, throw a two-seamer down and let it do his thing. And that's exactly what Miami does with Fulton and his two-seam. I really love it. Curveball, I think, is his best pitch. It's a 12-6 shape most of the time. Gets a lot of downward movement to it. It's a high 70s pitch. Sometimes gets into around the 80-mile-an-hour mark. And again, as we've talked about with Max Meyer, will the changeup fully develop here with Fulton? Meyer's changeup is well more advanced than Fulton's, but I do think that Fulton has the makings of a major league starter. I think this could still work out because he's shown, when healthy, the ability to throw strikes and a decent arsenal. The changeup, I think, will be a big thing for him. I'm just curious to see, like, can he stay healthy? That's one of the reasons I have him ranked a little lower is because of health reasons. And he hasn't really been able to show that for most of his career. So this will be a big year for him, I think. What does he look like coming back? It's a question. Victor Mesa Jr. had a really interesting year. He was on a heater to start the year. And, I would say heater, but through June 15th, he was slashing 270, 353, 449 with 6 home runs. And considering where he had come from, like mentioned in the article, 669 OPS in 2022, there were some things that really looked improved this year. The contact rate jumped, but then second half, or even not quite second half, but after June 15th, and then we see the tacky ball leave, like the contact rate jumps 8 percentage points, but the slash line drops pretty significantly. I do think there's still hit tool questions here. The contact was noticeably better in the second half. He's a good athlete, shown the ability to hit for some power, steal. I think the stolen bases are probably the biggest appeal for fantasy. But I do think the future outlook on Victor Mesa Jr. totally hinges on, like, how does the hit tool develop? And that's still a major question mark for me. It's like, what does that get to? And we'll see if those contact strides stick that we saw in the second half, and do the results come with it? I'd say that's probably still to be determined. Dane Myers gets talked about a little bit in the dugout, in the Discord, just because I think that there is potential, and others think there's potential for him to get a spot potentially in Miami, because there are playing time opportunities here. He's 27. He's an older prospect, and the performance has actually been rather good with Myers. Last year, 316 average, 406 OBP, 15 homers, 20 steals. You love to see those things. You look at the underlying data, 90-mile-an-hour average EV, check. 103.59 percentile. All right at MLB average. Like to see that. And the contact skills are good across the board. I mean, 86 in zone, 82% overall. But he is aggressive. He does chase a lot. But I will say, I think that Dane Myers might be a deep league target that is pretty interesting. Yeah, maybe he's not a superstar, obviously not a superstar, but maybe he is a sneaky deep league target. This system kind of thins out quickly. Jacob Amaya, some like him more than I do. I mean, he's a interesting profile where he's very passive. He doesn't swing often. He doesn't chase often. And he makes good contact. I think that he's better real life asset. He's got a decent glove and arm. I think there is potential for him to spend time in Miami this year, but what does the fantasy profile look like? And for me, like, it's just not enough to look at it and say, okay, like I believe in Jacob Amaya. Pat Monteverde is one that he really popped off, and he looked really good in Double-A, especially early in the season. It was like, okay, like, is this guy really legit or not? The data, the pitch level data, just is not good. Fastball sometimes sits in the upper 80s. Sometimes it gets into the 91, 92 range. When you're peaking at 92, like, it's not going to work, in my opinion. You're not going to miss enough bats. The slider does miss bats. It does generate chase, but ultimately, like, the fastball sets everything up. And then the changeup, I think, is pretty solid as well. It did have the highest whiff rate of any pitch this year for him, and it sits in the low 80s, some decent tumble and fade to it. I do think that he is a bullpen guy long term, even though he did have 5.4 innings per start, and that's pretty significant. I like to look at innings pitched per game start for guys in the minors, and that's sometimes pretty telling, but just not sure that Monteverde's fastball is MLB caliber, and that's concerning itself. I think we did get a question earlier about Yiddy, Cappy. Yeah, we did, from Aqua Sox. Eric, do we still believe in him? It's not looking good. I mean, you look at the profile, it looked like he was a potential breakout. I know some had him as a top 100 guy pre-2023, and that just went terribly south for him this year. He slashed 220, 250, 308, 5 home runs, 18 stolen bases. It is a hyper aggressive approach, which he is going to need to tone down a lot, in my opinion, to make it work. Cappy went from like everybody was talking about him, like he was very buzzy. And that tends to happen a lot, I think, with when you look at these young hitters. They look pretty decent. They come stateside and you're like, okay, like, who is he? And he's young, so I'm not going to completely write him off yet. But when you're swinging at 55, 56% of pitches, there's a little bit of a concern here. And you look at the frame, okay, there is some power projection. He did make reasonable contact last year, 74, 75%. So, like, it's not terrible. But I do think there are some big question marks that need to be answered here for a rebound. I think that really he's only rosterable in deeper leagues. He just not going to take a walk. He's swinging at everything, higher chase rates. I don't know. Like, I have my concerns about guys that even at lower levels are posting OBPs below 300. And he turned 21 at the end of the season. So I don't know. Like, you just want to see something more out of him. Maybe he shows that this year. We'll see. Could still put on some good weight, but he's not one that I'm like going out and investing in. Jacob Miller, interesting. He's one that is a prep. He was mid 90s, topping at 97, but then the fastball kind of took a step back and he averaged 92. I do think the shoulder issue likely affected that. He's been banged up for a lot of his career, but Miller still needs to show something more in order to kind of take that step forward. But he was a second round pick in 2022. He does have 4 pitches. I think if health permits, then he could still be something. He could still kind of move upwards, especially in this system where I do think there's plenty of potential for guys to move up. And there are some potential breakouts as well. Like Andres Valor is one that I kind of like taking a chance on. Fabian Lopez is another one. I think there's still some question marks about him, but he's an athletic switch hitter. And he showed some things in DSL. I like the swing. It looks really good from the left side. I'm curious to see like what his development path looks like, but there's still question marks about obviously Lopez, just being that we don't know a lot about him and we just have a little bit of DSL data. How reliable is that? Don't know. Andrew Lindsay's one who was actually, I think he was actually traded if I'm not mistaken. So Eric Lara was also traded. That was in the Tampa Bay, Miami deal. Andres Valor, who I mentioned, he's got a big frame. He's one that I actually, when I reevaluate, he moved up a little bit. So when I did my top 1,000 prospects, Valor moved up a lot. So he is, let me see where he actually sits on the list. This write-up was done in October, by the way, so it's been a little while, but I actually had bumped Valor up behind Monteverde. So that'd be 14 in the system. So you're looking at him right here in the older write-up as 21, and probably should go back and update all these older write-ups to kind of reflect that. Now I have a little more time, I can do so. So it's really good. A lot of projection here with Valor, 6'3", 180. He's got a really tall, lanky, long levers, but it is a simple swing. Like, you watch a swing and it's pretty simple. He hit 5 homers, stole 21 bags. He runs well. He did strike out 24% of the time, which is a little higher than you want to see from guys of the DSL, but he is still young. He was the MVP of the Marlins DSL team. So I do think that Andres Valor actually is one that could vault himself up this system pretty significantly with time. We'll see him at the complex this year. We'll get a earlier look on him than we thought now that the complex level has started earlier, which is a lot of fun. We talked a lot about that yesterday. How does that affect players? All that sort of stuff. That's the Marlins system. It's not very deep. We can talk any questions that you have. I'll be happy to answer those. If there's any breakout guys that maybe you think weren't mentioned, I'll be happy to discuss those as well. But we actually did 2 not so great systems to start. I'm a little more biased towards the Brave system. I know it well. I see it like much more often. The Marlins system actually don't get many looks at all. The only looks I can get is really AAA if they come to Gwinnett or in the fall league. So actually we'll be down there spring training, so may get some spring training looks at them. So that will be fun to check out. Tomorrow is the Mets. The Mets system actually will be a lot of fun. I've got film on, like my own film on most of those guys. Brooklyn's come through several times, a lot of AFL video as well. So the Mets system is a ton of fun that I'm excited to talk about. But again, I'll stick around. If you have any questions, be happy to answer them from the chat. Thank you for being here for a not so fun system. Happy Valentine's Day. And thanks for joining us. I'll hang out for a minute. Anybody want to chat? And if not, we'll get out of here. All right, guys. Well, hope you have a great Wednesday afternoon and evening. And I'll see you tomorrow. I will say if you're still in here, we will actually be doing it a little earlier tomorrow morning, just because I had already had some plans around lunchtime, so I won't be able to do the 1 o'clock show. But I'll let you know. I haven't decided if I'm going to do it at 10 o'clock Eastern or I'll do it later, like 2 Eastern. But I'll let you know. I think 2 Eastern might be a little better just for everybody. But we'll see. And I will post that and we'll talk tomorrow.